Hi, digital photo students. This is Mr. Roper, and I wanted to give you a little bit of overview of our next project, which is a still life photography unit. In this unit, we're going to talk about how you can use everyday objects from around your home to create really interesting, texturally rich photos in the style of a still life, which is a technique that's been used for hundreds of years in drawing and painting and by artists in all different styles. And in photography, it allows us a way to set up a very detailed image that shows off form, that shows off lighting and texture much more quickly than it would be to paint it. Okay, so I have a brief presentation here I want to go over with you that'll hopefully spark some ideas for what you can do for your own projects this week. So, a still life is a work of art that depicts mostly inanimate subject matter. Okay, not portraits, not people, not animal photography or anything like that, but mostly inanimate subject matter. Usually commonplace objects, which could be either natural, like food, flowers, dead animals, plants, rocks, shells, or man-made objects, things like glasses, books, vases, jewelry, coins, pipes, the kind of things you might find in like an antique store, just arranged in very carefully constructed compositions. Um, let's scroll through here, right? So typically, when you're creating a still life, you're grabbing these kind of static, inanimate objects and you're arranging them to really show off form and texture. You want your compositions to have a wide variety of textures to them so that as you look at it, you can kind of imagine what all those different surfaces would feel like, the way that the light would carry around them. You're really trying to highlight those textures and forms. As we said, this breaks down into two categories, natural and man-made items. And in traditional painting, this would be a way for the artist to kind of show off the wealth or the status of the individual that they were painting this for. So oftentimes they chose objects that were kind of higher end, very fancy candelabras and vases and glassware and dinnerware. And also paired together with some organic objects like fruits, vegetables, meats, cheeses, things that they had captured during their hunt. So you'll see some of that in some of these early paintings of still lifes, okay? One other thing, let me go back one step here, but one other thing that they often depicted was especially before the 1700s, they contained religious or allegorical symbols. Okay, these are things that at first glance you might think they're just everyday objects, but with a little bit deeper investigation, there's symbolism behind it. Like, why did they choose in this one an oyster shell or an abalone shell? What was the meaning behind that? There were often lots of little hidden messages in the objects that were chosen for these still lifes. So why do artists create still lifes? Well, originally it was a way to give the artist some more freedom in how they arrange the elements within a composition. For a painter, these are things that could take hours, if not days or weeks to paint. And for a photographer, with a still life, this is something we can arrange in a very short amount of time and then take careful attention to how we light it and how we compose it with the camera and inside the frame, so that we create a pleasing scene. So it gives you a lot of freedom to explore the settings of your camera and bring out those colors, textures, and forms that you might see. Okay. Early still lifes, like I said, these go way back into artistic history. We've found still lifes inside ancient Egyptian tombs. We've found still lifes in the frescoes of the buried city of Pompeii. Food objects would be included in these because the Egyptians also had this belief that, if you place these items in the tomb, that they'd be carried into the afterlife. So you can see that they carried over through different cultures, through different time periods. It was something that artists kept returning to. Now, a vanitas is a particular type of still life. It comes from Roman art. Oftentimes, these included food, flowers, skulls as a symbolism for death or for, kind of our finite time being alive. And they were also kind of there to bring out memories or sensations about the seasons. So you might see still lifes that represented the harvest in the fall, in winter, in summer, in spring. You'd have all the bright flowers that were in bloom, and they were really there to kind of stimulate the senses of the viewer. In the 16th century, still lifes really took off, especially as more and more artists kind of honed their skills and began painting in this realistic style. During the Renaissance, there was this really kind of like revived interest in the natural world, in art, in science, in the discoveries that they were making as they were kind of revisiting the ancient Greeks and Romans. And of course, they were coming into contact with other cultures in the New World, in the Americas, in Asia. So they were bringing all those new discoveries into the art. And they would take all these different objects and arrange them to kind of convey that sense of knowledge, of openness to other cultures, of openness to the world. In this example, you can see, look at just all the little tools in there of this artist. You've got a sculpture that's in progress. You've got a bust for reference. You can see the artist's sketchbooks in the background. And then, of course, in the foreground, we've got like blueprints and a compass and rulers and brushes and pencils. So all of this together is conveying that sense of this is a dedicated, serious artist who really studies their craft. You can also think about all the textures that are in this image, right? You've got the rough paper, the wrinkly paper, you've got the shiny metal tools, the stickiness of the paint on the palette, the roughness of the sculpture. So they were incorporating all those textures into their image as well. Okay. Dutch painters during this time created this type of still life called stilleven, which was dead nature. And dead nature paintings were these ones that we were talking about that had a lot of symbolism to them. They showed this sense of decay, a sense of like the passing of time or the fleetingness of time, that we have a very brief time on Earth. And they would often include a lot of symbolism in the flowers that they chose for these, that people kind of in the know would get those references. So you can see some of those references there. Roses were often used to portray the Virgin Mary or love or the goddess Venus. Lilies for virginity or purity, sunflowers for devotion. So it'd be interesting as you're planning this out, do an internet search for some of the flower symbolism, especially if you have flowers around your house or that you can find during a nature walk, and see, is there some symbolism that I can work in from that flower? And then that'll help you choose other objects that you could put into the design. There are genres of still lifes that have come out over the years. And in some of these, you'll see the same types of still lifes being recreated over and over again by different artists. One in particular was the coat rack, which was a common feature in many of the houses during these times. You could see things like the hunter, in the one here on the left. He's got his gauntlets from his armor. There's a bird that he's caught during hunting, and then there's this little note that's been tacked to the door. On the other side, you've got, it looks like it could be a postman. They've got some kind of delivery bag. They've got their hat, their water jug, and they've really carefully rendered out the shadows and all the little textures of those bags. It's really kind of a beautiful composition. Okay. Another common one would be the message board. Think of this like the old school Pinterest board. This would be a velvet or cork board that might be mounted to the wall, where people would stuff little items like their combs, their makeup vanities. You can see some scissors in there, some pen quills, little notes and photographs from their loved ones. So maybe you already have a board like this somewhere in your home, or you could very quickly set one up with like meaningful items that you might have in your room and photograph it. Okay, looking for various in textures and colors and things like that. Of course, food we talked about already. Food is a common theme. Here's a couple still life examples from photography. And in the one on the left, they've almost recreated it in the style of a painting, right? They've got a very dark, looks like it might be a velvet background, several different fruits, bread, a butter knife, a little jug of a beverage there in a fancy glass. And they've lit the scene with very, very soft lighting. And it's all coming from one side so that you get these dramatic shadows with dark shadows on the side, revealing all the form of that fruit, of the olives on the plate. We get the really nice reflection on the glass there. So those are things you can look for as you're arranging your items. Try to get that painterly effect by bringing in some soft light from your window. Okay. An outdoor still life is totally appropriate as well, especially if you have some, nice uh, uh, trees and grass in the background, some sunlight filtering in, and you can see they've set up a plate here of cheese and fruit, a nice little marble platter. We get the rough texture of the table. Really, really nice, pleasant one here. One quick note on an outdoor one, you probably want to do this either earlier in the morning or later in the day so that the sun's not directly overhead. Otherwise, the lighting's just going to be too intense. You're going to have really hard shadows from that full sunlight. If you do it later in the day or early in the morning, you've got light coming from the side. It'll be much softer. You'll get a cool look or a warm look if you do it in the afternoon. So just keep something to keep in mind there. Okay. Another thing you can experiment with for these is just doing still lives based on color, right? These are three really great examples of the artist picking all objects that had a similar color, even if their textures are different. And it creates this really cool, like moody, lonely mood in the blues. Warm has this kind of happiness or energy to it. Spring and summertime, which we're finally getting good weather. Color harmonies, colors that are near each other on the color wheel, like yellow, orange, red, or green, blue, purple. Those can create really nice ones there too. And I like this one on the bottom. They got the yellows and the oranges, but then they contrasted it with the really, really dark background and the bright white napkin. So it helps those colors stand out. Okay. Some other common themes here, I'll just briefly go over these. Meals, you might put together a still life based on one particular meal. Maybe you're making a meal for dinner that night, or it could be something that you've picked up from one of our neighborhood restaurants. This is kind of a fun one. It's called The Burning House. You can check this out at the web address there. And the Burning House Project is this one where they pose a question. If your house was on fire and you had to evacuate with only 15 minutes, what would be the things that you would grab? And so what people do is they take a look around their house and they grab those most important objects, and then you arrange them in a really pleasing still life. You can see in here they've got some photographs, mementos, of course, the phone, but they put it with a brightly colored fabric so that it's a little bit more pleasing, and they've arranged it to show off all the different textures of those items. As you're doing this too, again, think about symbolism. This is a really kind of dark still life image here, but there's some interesting symbolism, going on with the different objects that they've chosen here. And of course, the skull's reminding us of death, but then we've got the sugar, we've got the insect there. So there are ways that you can really look at still life paintings as little secret puzzles to kind of figure out. For example, how does it make you feel when you first view that still life? What is your immediate reaction emotionally to it? Is it repulsion? Is it interest? Is there a mystery to solve? Okay. Then look at the different objects that are inside that still life and break down, what do they represent to you? We said the skull represents death, toxicity, like we associate skulls with poison, decay, mortality. That's a really rich symbol that's in there. The fly or the bug there could be addiction to the sugar in the image, could be decay, pestilence, So there's some interesting symbol there. And then the foods that they chose, like sugar cubes, right, is kind of like industrialization. You're taking this raw product of sugar and then forcing it into these regular size cubes that are all identical. There's kind of a sterile feeling about it. Fragility, because those sugar cubes are very fragile and they kind of crumble when you touch them. So altogether, there's a lot of symbolism going on in this still life. Okay, and then you try to break down, like, what's the meaning behind it. You'll know if you've got a really successful still life if there's kind of a little hidden mystery that your audience has to look at and figure out. So play around with that this week. Okay, as you begin to plan this, think about what is going to be the content. What do I want to base this on a theme? If so, what objects would really work well? We talked about springtime. You could do a very nice springtime still life using fresh fruits and vegetables, flowers from your yard or from the outdoor. Excuse me, I'll grab some water. And just kind of start to collect those objects around the house that you might use. If you want to do it about other themes, just write down, make a list of what those objects would be and start to collect them first. Okay. Think about the form that it's going to take. What objects will you place in there? Which one's going to be the dominant object, the biggest, the most eye-catching that you notice first? How are you going to arrange all the different pieces so that it doesn't just look like a crowded mess, but that there's actually it moves your eye around the scene so that we go from one object to the next to the next. These are all really important considerations, and it's going to take some trial and error. You're going to want to experiment with a couple different approaches before you snap off your final shots, okay? And then think about the process, depending on whether you're using a DSLR or your cell phone camera for this. Some considerations might be, what kind of lighting are you going to use? Do you have a window nearby where you can get some nice natural side lighting? Can you put fabric in front of that window so that it changes the quality of the light from hard to soft or diffused? What lens do you want to use for this? Is it better to use a wide angle so that you can capture all the things in the scene? Or is it better to zoom in a little bit so that we only see what you want us to see? If you have the ability with your DSLR to choose the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, then go ahead and make those settings. Decide, if it's a wide open aperture like f3 or f4, then probably only a very narrow part of the scene is going to be in focus, and the background will be blurry and the foreground will be blurry. If you use a smaller aperture like f11, f16, then more of those objects will be in focus. So that's a decision you can make. Okay. Once you've got all these questions, you're ready to begin your project. So go ahead and start taking lots and lots of photos, okay? We're going to ask that you create at least 4 different still lifes during the course of the week. So maybe plan 1 a day, different objects, different locations, different lighting. See what you can come up with. This is one that I actually did with my photo students, and this was all created inside the photo studio. So we got a table. We found a piece of old brown velvet fabric, and we draped that over the table. In the prop cupboard, I had lots of little objects like these glass bottles, light bulbs. I had my science skull, some little metal chains, and then we had a whole bunch of fake flowers that we used for this, and arranged them in a vase. As I put this in, I was trying to find different textures. So I've got soft, I've got shiny, I've got smooth, I've got slick. I've got the soft petals of the flowers. All of these combine to create some really nice texture, and our eye is guided around. We go from the bright reds down to the shiny coppers, down to the silver light bulb, over to the skull. Our eye is constantly moving around the scene. And then I used really limited light source for this. I really only had one big light up above it. I used a light bulb for this. But I tried to keep a lot of the image in shadow in order to create that sense of mystery. I didn't want to reveal everything. I wanted to be a little bit dark here. Okay. Some of these I shot actually when I was visiting different antique stores around Europe. This one was in Bordeaux, in France, and it was just so creepy. I had to nab it with my camera, but it worked as a very effective still life. Okay, some other objects with little statues. Maybe you can collect some of these statues from around your home if you have little knickknacks that your parents or your family's collected, and just rearrange them carefully. Light sources, lamps. Obviously, there were some really weird items here in these antique stores, but feel free to experiment however you want. Okay. I hope you guys enjoy this one. We want to get you away from the computers again this week and get some hands-on activity. So go out there, search around, see what you can find, put together your still lives, and then when we meet for our first class meeting of the week, we'll want to see your rough draft ideas. I can give you some feedback on what needs to be improved, and then from there you can finish them up. Okay. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with, and we'll talk to you very soon.